All right. So last year I gave a presentation on the history of the Chamber of Commerce here in Newberg. And while I was going through a tote of primary source documents, newspaper clippings, all kinds of cool stuff like that, I came across some, articles about this Berrian Society, and someone had mentioned it to me in passing as well. So I thought, well, what is that? So I wanted to look into it and give a presentation to the Historical Society. So I've gone through what I could find, and this is a history of the Berrian Society and Festival. Let's see if this progresses. There we go. So raspberry, blackberry, loganberry straw, roll 'em, stew 'em, and eat 'em raw. Rose fair, state fair, berry fair too. Hurrah for the Berrians, and they'll root for you, was a quote that I found. They were a kind of a cheerleading team, and I wanted to get to the root of what brought them about. And so it's interesting to say that there is a connection between Newberg and Portland. And even though we have the Chehalem Mountains is sort of this big geographic, block, there's still, this yearning as far as the infrastructure and the commerce is concerned to be connected to Portland. And Portland is sort of, especially we're talking at the turn of the century, to turn of the last century, it's the epicenter of culture for Oregon as well. So those looking, to Portland were watching what they were doing there. And so you had Miss Georgiana Burton Pittock, who was married to a prominent Portland publisher, Henry Pittock, those that lived in the Pittock Mansion. She founded the Rose Society in 1888, and it was an annual rose show which grew and grew and grew to include a pageant and a parade by 1906. So it grew so large that they sort of needed a team of people to present the Rose Festival, to help usher people into different parts of the Rose Festival. So they founded the Royal Rosarians in 1912, and they became the official greeters and hosts of the Rose Festival. They greeted not just for the Rose Festival, for dignitaries from around the world who came to Portland, all kinds of really important people from Washington, D.C. or far-flung places of the globe. They would meet the Royal Rosarians, and the Rosarians would give them a history of Portland and a tour, but also they were there to promote commerce and the economics of the Portland area. They sort of became the cheerleaders of business and economy. So at the same time, here in Newberg, not too far from Portland, we know that, but we recently on the Historical Society recently ran a couple of articles about the post-Spanish flu, and how that impacted Newberg. But also we were just, in the 1920s, just coming home from World War I. And so you sort of had all of these soldiers who left as boys and came back as worldly experienced men. And you sort of had the introduction of globalization. They had seen, the other parts of the world. And so there's some men that came back and they knew that there was a connection to industry, and the world was a much bigger place. And so, especially with the advent of the radio, you started to get, sorry, I'll let somebody else in here. You started to get more news and information and commercials. And so you sort of see this, not information once a week or every other week through newspapers, but every night you would get new information, and you'd listen to commercials. And so there's this growth of kind of like a globalization of economy. And Newberg was saying, well, we want to be a part of what's going on in Portland to a certain extent. And so how do we transition, from this rugged independence to sort of a connected economic society? So they looked at the Royal Rosarians, and they wanted to emulate this. And they said, okay, well, what's our biggest industry? It's not roses. What are we known for? And so they looked high and they looked low, and they're, well, what about berries? We're connected to berries. And so they founded by the Newberg members of the Chamber of Commerce in 1921. not by the chamber itself, but by certain members of the commerce who were interested in promoting commerce and industry from Newberg to the rest of Oregon and to the rest of the world. So they established the Berrian Society. And since the organization took its name from berries, all of the officers were named after berry-type plants. And so the president was the chief blackcap, and the vice president was the sub-chief munger, and the secretary was the chief scribe Logan. The assistant scribe was an evergreen, and the treasurer was a gold dollar, keeper of the patch, and keeper of the berry patch. You got these really wacky names, but they meant business, and they wanted to support, some of the largest, commerce and industry that was coming out of Newberg at the time. Unfortunately, it was only around for 7 years, and then it took a hiatus in 1928. Now, according to George Edmonston's book, there was the drill team uniforms were unattainable, and so they took a hiatus, they took a break. But the break lasted from 1928 until 1937. So I think maybe the hiatus was affected by more than just a lack of uniforms, but maybe it had something to do with the stock market crash in 1929 and the subsequent Great Depression, which we didn't come out of until the end of the 1930s. So here in 1937, and sort of fits with that timeline, and we get a return or reestablishment of the Berrian Society, and you get the Berrian Festival, which returns, and it sort of becomes a big to-do in 1941, though. So the Berrian Festival, as it were, only lasted for a few more years. And in 1941, they ditched the name Berrian Festival, and they said, well, what's, if we're here to really support commerce and industry in Newberg, what is the up-and-coming commerce and industry? And that was big-time farming. And so they said, well, let's support this Newberg Farm Product Show that the farmers put on annually. And so they switched it from a 4th of July timeframe to September to celebrate the harvest. Slowly but surely, they expanded to include a lot of what today's old-fashioned festival looks like, and the events that it provides. And then they renamed Farmeroo for a short while. So you might have heard Farmeroo, or you might have thumbed through some history books of Newberg, and that's where the name comes from. I was really fortunate. I reached out to Brian Love, who's kind of does everything in our community, a little bit of everything. And he happened to have these on hand. And so you have from 1962, a Berrian Festival guide. You've got a grand prize cup from the second ever Berrian Festival in 1922. And then you've got a booster button from the Farmeroo of 1949. So the Berrian Festival was inspired by previous festive events. So if there's anything that Oregonians like, it's kind of a festive event. I think it's probably human nature, to be honest with you. But most, if not all of these events here listed, let's see if I can move. I got something in the way here. There we go. The Newberg Fair, Independence Day, the Rose Show, a 4th of July celebration, and the annual GAR, or the Grand Army of the Republic. All of these were annual events that took place in Newberg, celebrations that we had stemming from the 1890s all the way until basically they decided to start the Berrian Festival. The GAR, interestingly enough, the Grand Army of the Republic, was a Veterans Day recognition of veterans of the Civil War. So we're talking, it's the 1890s. So there's definitely still veterans of the Civil War at that time. So that's when that was taking place. So upon their return to throwing festivals in Newberg, the Berrians also took on a larger role in the state of Oregon. And so in that piece that I read earlier, where'd I put that note? The raspberry, blackberry, loganberry straw, Rose Fair, State Fair, and Berry Fair too. The Rosarians would travel, or the Berrians, I should say, would travel. They would travel to the State Fair. They would travel to the Rose Festival. They would travel to parades in Lincoln City and in Roseburg. They would travel all throughout Oregon, representing the best of what Newberg had to offer. Always speaking well about the commerce and businesses here, and trying to make good business connections while just having a good time. They often, let's see here, if you, I should have made you the admin, Rachel. That'll be the next trick that we got to learn. So they would win here in Newberg. We would build winning floats and attaching lots of roses to them, and travel up to the Portland Rose Festival to go represent the best that Newberg had to offer. But all good things must come to an end. So for years and years, there was a good run. So once they brought the Berrians back in 1937, then the name of the event might have changed a few times. But by and large, the Berrians had thrown some sort of event from 1937 until 1975. Newberg, I just found this headline today as I was going through a tub. Newberg finally buries the Berrian Festival. And it wasn't until 1975 where the Berrians disbanded due to a lack of interest, and they gave up the Berrian Festival. But the Chamber of Commerce wasn't having that. So 2 years went by with no annual event, and the Chamber of Commerce said, you know what, we need to do something. People love to do something. So the Chamber started the Old Fashioned Days, which was in 1981 renamed to the Old Fashioned Festival. And so that's how the Old Fashioned Festival, which we, aside from 2020 being the terrible year that it is, that's how we, came upon the Old Fashioned Festival. It's not a direct route, but there's definitely a connection. And I really enjoyed looking through some of these sources here. Of course, Mr. Brian Love provided a lot of the primary sources that I was able to thumb through today. But, for the last month or so, I was able to look through a book by George Edmonston called The Grubby End, or Stories from the Grubby End. And some of these are really familiar sources. If you've done any presentation or any study for Newberg history, some of the centennial papers that were printed by the Graphic in 1989 had a lot of really useful bits and pieces of information, which I was able to corroborate by actually finding some of the headlines from other newspapers in a bin today. When I was looking for one thing and I found a bunch of other things. So this information is just going to get richer and richer. This is just the first presentation of this, but I will write this as a paper and present it on our website.